Get ready. You're about to experience the life science effect. The most influential players in biotech, pharma, and medical device, bringing you their insights and inspirational stories. Are you ready to boost your career? Ready to set your medical innovation in motion? You have arrived at the right place. Every week, another industry leader, more insights, more inspiration, and tips you can implement right away to make your mark on the world. Hey everybody, this is Steve Vinson. Special show for you this week. As you may remember, I had Angela Demaree of Beyond the Stethoscope on my show several weeks ago. Man, it's probably been about a month. And it was a great show. I hope you heard it. While we were at it, Angela went ahead and interviewed me for her show for Beyond the Stethoscope. And what we thought we would do this week, she went ahead and played my interview of her on her show this week. So I'm going to go ahead and play her interview of me on my show this week. So what you're about to hear is what I sound like when I'm on the other side of the microphone. We talked about everything. The thing that is most poignant to me is we talked about Basil the Wonder Dog, who at the time was still alive. The sad news I have to report is Basil has since passed. He was old. He was almost 16 years old, a min pin, and just really, he had already cheated death enough times, and he finally ran out of luck or ran out of time. It was time for him to go. But so you'll hear us talking about Basil, and you'll hear my admiration for the little guy. He's no longer with us. But anyway, neither here nor there. So what you're about to hear is me talking about some of the trends in biotechnology and pharmaceuticals and medical devices and artificial intelligence, etc. Angela's a good interviewer. It's a great show. I encourage you to go check out her podcast called Beyond the Stethoscope. And without further ado, here's our special show.
Today, I'm here with Steve Vinson. Steve has provided business and technical leadership for life science firms for over 25 years. Abbott, Lilly, Pfizer, Boston Scientific, IU Health, and Cook Medical, just to name a few, have all relied upon his leadership. Pharmaceutical, medical device, healthcare, and biotech firms, as well as chemical and telecommunications companies, have benefited from Steve's project leadership and management skills. Through his passion for continuous learning, Steve's experience ranges from strategic consulting to clinical laboratory systems to client compliance and quality improvement. His values-centered leadership style has made Steve a trusted colleague to entrepreneurs and an effective consultant, relied upon by executives at top corporations. Well, welcome, Steve. Is there anything that you'd like to add to your introduction?
No, I think I might like to take a few things out. Boy, that sounds great. That makes me sound awesome, especially when you say it.
Well, I'm really excited. And I want to tell our listeners, this is really cool because we are actually here in person.
Yes.
And Fishers, Indiana. So it's very rare that I actually get to do these interviews in person and not over the interwebs. So
cool.
I appreciate
you get to see
that.
my facial expressions and body language and all that stuff. I guess one thing I would add, that was it was a very good introduction. Thank you. It sounds a lot like my LinkedIn profile, which I think it is because my producer tried to get me to send her a bio, and then, like I always do, I was too late, and I think she pulled that off of there. I would add, I am currently working for BPM Associates, who's also the presenting sponsor for my podcast. So that's the other thing I do. I host a podcast called The Life Science Effect. But BPM Associates, I'm a consultant with them, and so I do large, complex projects at big corporations. And more recently, we're trying to figure out if that skill set that we have for helping to commercialize products in biopharmaceuticals, medical devices, and so forth, if that sort of project management skill set can be applicable to small startup companies as well.
Oh, cool.
So,
very cool. I am so excited to have a conversation with you today about advances in the life sciences field and technology and things to look for in 2019. So with your knowledge and expertise in the Indiana life sciences and technology startup space, I would just absolutely would love to hear your impressions, thoughts, and what to watch for in the upcoming year.
Absolutely. About a year ago, I decided I needed to learn more about the local scene, the pharmaceutical, biotech, medical device scene, especially as it relates to more recent technological advances and startups and entrepreneurs. If you had asked me what goes on at a large corporation, I could have told you that story, but I realized I didn't really know what was going on locally. So I decided I wanted to do that research and start to meet people in the startup scene. Also, I had my own personal podcast going at that time, just a fun thing I do with my friend.
Oh, great.
It's we focus on comedy and like topical things, and we do some radio type fiction, radio play type stuff.
Nice.
So I was enjoying podcasting. So I said, what better way to sort of figure out the scene than to start a podcast? But I had to start someplace. So I went to someone I knew at the Indiana Health Industry Forum, which would be, I would say, anybody's first stop if they're trying to figure out the local scene. Could be the Indiana Health Industry Forum. Kristen Jones is the CEO of that, and she will bend over backwards to help anybody meet anybody else they need. So that would be a recommendation for your listeners if they're starting a company and they want to get plugged into the local scene. That would be one good place to start.
Great, thanks.
ihif.org. And then from there, so she was guest one on my podcast. From there, the next, which is a newer entity here in Indiana, and they're connected with BioCrossroads and the Indiana Economic Development folks, is the Indiana Biosciences Research Institute, which is headed up by a guy named Reiner Fisher, who's fairly new to Indiana. He's only been here a few years, but what they do, they actually have research labs, and they have big data laboratories, and they also have networking opportunities. So that would be the next stop. Indiana decided about 15 or 20 years ago to really focus on life sciences. We have Lilly here and Roche and Elanco as the really big guys in town, and Beckman Coulter and so forth. But Indiana decided to take advantage of that talent pool and those big entities here to try to really build up the life science industry in central Indiana and Indiana in general. And the Indiana Biosciences Research Institute is part of that. So
cool.
Their idea is to be a way that startup companies can have access to money, to laboratories, to each other, and to sort of be a bridge to help those companies connect. The other thing that's going on down there, they are actually at the corner of like 16th Street and the White River, so right downtown. Okay. And there's a space they've just broken ground on the first building of what's called 16 Tech, which would be sort of like an innovation district where the large companies will have space there. Places like IU and Purdue will have space there as well. And this Indiana Biosciences Research Institute will be the anchor client for the first building. So that's going on, which is pretty exciting. And when I was talking with Reiner Fisher, I didn't realize this, but after you think about it, it kind of makes sense. Mm-hmm. Indiana is the second leading exporter of medical products behind California. Is the only other state that exports more medical products than Indiana. We have 60,000 workers in the life sciences industry just in central Indiana. And when you combine that with the tech things like Salesforce moving in and a lot of other tech companies in the area, so people are starting to call us the Silicon Prairie.
Yeah.
which is a term that I've started using a lot because it really distinguishes us from a lot of the other, from the coasts, let's say.
And it's so funny that you say that, how to distinguish ourselves from the coast, because as you know, I've just gotten involved in the biotech space myself with a veterinary technology startup. And I've just been amazed at the amount of technology right here in Indiana and in the Midwest.
Yeah.
For any of our listeners who are thinking about career transitions, who are in the healthcare space or busy professionals and saying, oh, I really am interested in becoming more involved with the tech startups or this technology space, but I don't want to move to the coast or to Silicon Valley. Well, there's a lot really happening right here in Indiana and in the Midwest. Any other insights that you have on that?
There absolutely is. And, I think you and I were talking earlier in a separate conversation about you wanted to try the startup thing, but you didn't want to move to California, right?
Right.
Obviously, what Central Indiana has to offer. The city, Indianapolis is a very livable, family-friendly town. We have roots here. The work ethic in the Midwest is just different than on the coast. And there are ways to plug in. Now, I've never been to the Bay Area startup scene. I've never been to the Boston medical device scene. So I can't speak for what it's like there. But here, you might need to be a little more deliberate about it and make sure you go out there and meet the right people. First, again, if you're in the life sciences, absolutely would say, and I would be happy to introduce anybody to Kristen Jones over at Indiana Health Industry Forum or the folks over at IBRI.
Okay.
There's where we're recording right now is called Launch Fishers, which you can just walk around here and meet people. And again, I'd be happy to introduce anybody to some of those people. But there are stories every day of companies around. Well, if you live up in the Lafayette area, there's the Purdue Foundry, and I was talking with one of the folks out there, John Hannock, who is one of the managing director of Purdue Ventures. They're building a new building called the Discovery Park District, which they hope is a place where you can walk in the front door and figure out where you fit.
Oh, wow.
To develop a new product, any kind of product, including life science products, you need capital, you need talent, and you need a technology, right?
Yep.
So if you're any one of those three things, you have some money and you want to invest, or you have a technology, you have an idea, or maybe you have a talent. You're an engineer, you're a scientist, you're a project manager like I am. The idea of that area at Purdue and the idea of 16 Tech that I talked about earlier is a place you can go to sort of walk in and say, I have this talent, where do I fit?
Wow.
So
that's really cool, especially for those subject matter experts that are listening to the podcast. Yeah. How do I figure this out? How do I network? Where do I go? Those are some really great, tangible tips. I really appreciate that, Steve.
You bet. It's so needed, too, in this area. One of the biggest challenges, so the huge opportunity in the biopharma space and the medical device space and traditional pharmaceutical space, the challenge for the Midwest is really talent retention. We have great universities, Indiana University, Purdue University, Ball State, Notre Dame. I mean, we have at least half a dozen I could just rattle off world-class institutions turning out top talent. The IU School of Medicine is one of the top schools of medicine in the nation. So where are they going? Why don't we have the talent we need? Because there is a talent shortage. It's what they call brain drain, right? People believe they need to go to the coast. So our challenge is, how do we match up the opportunity with the right talent and keep them here in Central Indiana? And I think that people like John Hannock up at Purdue Ventures and Purdue Foundry and 16 Tech, I think that's their challenge, is what do they offer that's going to keep people here? So if you're one of the people who wants to be part of the scene and you have a talent, it's sort of your market right now.
Right.
It's out there. You just have to plug into the scene to figure out where you fit.
Well, and I wonder how many people just assume they've got to move to the coast or go seek out opportunities in the coast without even knowing how or where to look in their own backyard for these opportunities. So I really appreciate you sharing that with all of us. As you know, many of my listeners are in the healthcare field and are also busy professionals. Can you share any technological advances that may make their lives easier?
A lot is happening right now with big data and machine learning sort of combining to help. And if I think about a doctor or a nurse or a veterinarian, robots aren't going to take over your job. With big data and machine learning, sometimes called artificial intelligence, what you're going to see is software being able to recommend a diagnosis. So with enough data and the right machine learning algorithms, the software will be able to determine maybe more quickly, maybe with more accuracy. It'll be able to narrow down the number of diagnoses that you have to take a look at.
Sure.
So it'll be able to recommend a diagnosis for you and make your life easier that way. At least give you a place to start,
Or at least give you your differential diagnosis list and how to shuffle those around to put the most likely at the top without saying, oh, we're going to take over with AI or machine learning. It's more of a suggestion. We still need people and we still need our own complex thought processes. But yeah, it would be, especially for those really difficult cases that you've never seen before. Yeah. And you have a lot of information, it's pretty easy to get blood work and x-rays and a full workup. But if it's something that's just not quite connecting the dots in the traditional way, that could be really useful.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I like the way you put it. I mean, it's giving you more data and more information to work with and helping you narrow things down. And by the way, that just, you could probably point to a lot of technological advances in history. The jobs that the artificial intelligence, if you want to call it that, the jobs that it'll take over are the ones you really don't want to have to do anyway, right? You want to be able to make a diagnosis quicker and get them on a treatment plan quicker, and don't want to have to waste your time doing tests that maybe you wouldn't need to do because the software can figure out you don't need that. One example is I just heard this at a venture capital presentation recently. Somebody at Google figured out that they could take images of a human retina, and feed it into a machine learning algorithm. And with the amount of data they had, diagnose diabetes with high accuracy or recommend that diagnosis. And then, of course, you would do other tests just from an image of a retina. And I had this conversation with somebody recently, and they said, well, what is it about the retina? I mean, is it the way, the patterns and all this? And that's part of the beauty of it, and also part of the scariness of it is you don't really need to know. All you need to know is you fed this image of a retina to the software, and it used the data to figure out something about that retina that told it this person probably has diabetes.
So somewhere along the way, there are some scientists who had already sort of figured this out and did the machine learning to program the software. Is that kind of what I'm understanding?
So that's the amazing
part. The average
part.
Person doesn't necessarily need to know.
No, the scientists would not even necessarily have known. What they know is we have, say, 50,000 images of retinas, right? And we know what conditions the people had that we took these images from, right? And so some subset of those retinas, those people had diabetes, right? So the machine learning algorithm, all they're doing is learning. They go, okay, I have a retina. I'm going to predict whether or not this person has diabetes.
Based on the other however many hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands are in the database with that disease already.
It starts out almost random. So the machine will go, no, it doesn't have this person doesn't have diabetes, and then find out whether it was right. Okay. And then it'll go to the next one, and it'll say, okay, this one I'll predict yes, and then it'll find out whether it was right. But it's going to do that thousands and thousands and thousands of times, and it's going to start to learn, I'm more likely to be right if I pay attention to these certain things.
Oh, right? Okay. I see what you're saying.
Which is scary and fascinating at the same time.
It really is. Yeah.
So another thing we're seeing a lot of is a lot of people can relate to this, wearables. Like an Apple Watch, for example, or an insulin, something that you can wear that will recommend insulin doses.
Sure.
Is another big example where the software. So what that's going to help you with is it can help you with diagnosis. It can help you with treatment and compliance with treatment. Well, I think one of the early examples is, people would come home wearing something that would measure their heart rhythm on a periodic basis.
Right.
And then you'd plug it into the phone and it would send the data off. Well, think of it like that, but much more sophisticated, also using data and machine learning.
Okay.
So that's another one. Another big one, this one's been going on for a few years, is something called companion diagnostics. And what that is you pair, it's a medical device, a diagnostic machine that can tell you the exact response a person might have to a certain drug. So for example, when FDA approves drugs, one of the things they look at is the risk profile.
Okay.
If you tell them, okay, it will improve their disease by a certain amount, at the same time, they'll have a risk of heart problems or liver problems or some other organ is going to react poorly. A lot of times the FDA would just not approve that drug because the risk is too high compared to the benefit. With companion diagnostics, you can go back in and say, if we knew more about that person, either their genetic makeup or some other aspect of that person, if we knew more about them, could we better predict that specific person's risk to this drug?
And better tailor the drugs to the people
so you
and to
can
the
pull
diagnosis.
a drug off the shelf that got denied by the FDA and say, okay, but what if we only gave it to people who tested this way with this specific diagnostic test? And drugs are getting approved that way.
Well, that's
So
really
that's a big one that's going to happen more and more. And finally, precision medicine, using genomics, which is what you were just alluding to, where you can tailor drugs and doses and things to a specific person based on their genetic profile. So those are kind of the trends that are happening right now that'll make the medical professional's job easier. I think, easier, more effective. Let's say more effective, easier to do the thing that you want, which is to get the patient better.
Right. No, absolutely. And being able to predict which medications are going to be most effective absolutely also improves patient compliance and patient outcomes as well. So thank you so much for sharing those trends with me. Were there any other in the space that may or may not be useful directly to a medical professional that you just think, oh my gosh, this is the coolest thing I've ever heard of, and I just can't wait to share it with the world?
I already mentioned it, but the one I'm most excited about, I think, is the big data and machine learning piece. One of the projects, this is not an artificial intelligence story, but it's kind of the application piece. One of my favorite projects that I've done in the last 10 years or so was automating a laboratory where there were dozens of medical technicians who had to review results coming off of diagnostic machines by hand. They had to put samples on the machine, blood samples, urine samples and things on the machines by hand, which is how it works at a hospital typically, especially a smaller hospital. The samples come in, a medical technician, highly trained med tech, puts the sample on the machine, the results come off, they look at them, they mark them up, decide whether to retest it based on the results they're getting, and then interpret the results. Turns out software can do a lot of that. And then in talking with the med techs, because my dad was a factory worker his whole life. So automation means eliminating jobs, right?
Right.
So one of my concerns was, how are the med techs going to feel about this?
Right.
After talking to them, I realized 80% of the work they were doing was work they'd rather not be doing. Because they said, well, what I'm doing is I'm looking at a piece of paper and I'm comparing this result to what's typical. And if it's within a certain amount over what's typical, I rerun the sample. And then the second result comes off. I compare the two results. I do a calculation. If software could do that, I'd rather not have to do it. The ones I want to work on is when maybe I've done a third test and now that one's kind of weird. And compared to the last time we tested this patient, something's just not right. And I need to go to the stethoscope and look at the blood cells and see what's going on specific. That's the work I want to be doing. If you have software that does all that preliminary stuff for me, great. Now, it might mean we don't need as many med techs as we would have otherwise. But with the growth of diagnostic testing and everything, doesn't mean anybody's going to lose their job. It just means we're maybe not going to need to hire as many med techs in the future, which, by the way, there's a talent shortage there. So we don't have as many med techs to hire. So it's sort of a everybody wins case. And I see machine learning and artificial intelligence helping medical professionals get to answers faster so they can help more patients, make more of a difference faster.
And that's really what most people in the healthcare professions want, right?
Yeah.
To make more of a difference and spend more of their time, not just being busy, but actually making that impact. So are there any resources that you might recommend, Steve, to keep up with the tech changes in the industry or other leadership resources other than the ones you mentioned here in Indiana?
Absolutely, right. Being in Indiana, I guess I'm kind of Indiana-centric. So absolutely go to indianabiosciences.org and ihif.org. The Inside Indiana Business
Okay.
has a life science newsletter.
Yeah.
So there's another place to stay on top of things. But hey, I recommend listening to this great podcast called The Life Science Effect.
Yes. I actually learned about a great resource by listening to that podcast, Steve. For our listeners, that's Steve's podcast, The Life Science Effect.
Plug, right?
It's really I really enjoyed it. One of your episodes talked about the life science leader. So that's a resource that I now really enjoyed and was, introduced through your podcast. So I want to thank you for that as well. So was there anything else that you want to add, Steve, on this topic of emerging trends and to watch for in 2019?
No, I think we're good. You said you enjoyed the biopharma trends in biopharma podcast.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I would add there is it's another opportunity because there's a shortage of capacity. Biopharma, by the way, for people, I think your listeners might already know because you have some very intelligent listeners, but just in case.
Okay.
The difference between a pharmaceutical and a biopharmaceutical is the pharmaceutical is a chemically synthesized product, drug. Mm-hmm. A biopharmaceutical was derived from an organism. So whether it's yeast or bacteria or something like that, and it is sort of a biological product in and of itself, like a protein or a monoclonal antibody, something like that. The issue is really for those of us on the manufacturing side and the getting drugs approved side, you can show chemical equivalents of just a regular pharmaceutical product. It's a definite chemical with a definite chemical structure and a very specific synthetic route. With a biopharmaceutical, it's harder because it's organisms making it under very specific conditions. Mm-hmm. So it's harder to prove that you have a chemical entity that is exactly like another chemical entity that's out there. So FDA has a whole completely different pathway for approving those and proving that they're safe and everything. But they're growing really quickly. The first time I was involved in a biopharmaceutical product was an orphan drug, what's called an orphan drug,
Sure.
which what that means, it's a horrible term for it now that I think about it. But what that means is it's a drug that maybe there's not a huge market for, mm-hmm. but FDA will give preferential treatment and longer exclusivity if a company goes ahead and develops and markets that.
Yep.
And the one I worked on was for acromegaly, which is a gigantism, which not a lot of people have, but it's an absolutely devastating disease. And there was this biological product that was showing promise in clinical trials, but the FDA was still new at trying to figure out how to approve these kinds of drugs because
Sure.
it's an organism making it. So being able to control that was brand new to people. So that's 20 years ago, I think. Now, something like 50 to 55% of the market is biopharmaceuticals. It's growing like crazy. It's a $300 billion industry. Problem is we don't have enough manufacturing capacity.
Oh, wow.
So while the market's growing really fast, the amount of manufacturing capacity is not growing as fast. So I would say the trend there is if you have some talent around biopharmaceutical manufacturing, you could probably live wherever you want to live as long as you are able to apply that expertise to helping to grow the capacity of manufacturing.
Wow. That's not, when you think of the world in general and fewer and fewer manufacturing jobs being available, you don't always think about new and emerging markets where there aren't enough manufacturing capacity.
True.
So that's really interesting insight.
That's
there.
one that could change a lot. China has not looked favorably upon contract manufacturing, which is if you're not contract manufacturing, that means you are the company that discovered the drug, you're marketing the drug, you're selling the drug, you're making the drug. Mm-hmm. Contract manufacturing would be, I didn't discover it, I'm not marketing it, I sell manufacturing services. The Chinese government hasn't looked favorably on that in the past because of control, probably a lot of good reasons. And so, but they're starting to try out and test the concept of contract manufacturing. And like everything else with China, the numbers would be staggering if they suddenly started being able to stand up good, high quality manufacturing capacity. So that could all change in the next few years. So the opportunity, it may be a short window for that opportunity, but
Well, that's really interesting.
Something to check out.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you so much. And now it's time for my favorite part of the show, which is our 5 questions segment. And I know the best information that I've come across is what I've learned from my mentors and other successful people. So I thought this would be a great way to add value to our listeners' busy lives and support each other. So first, let me ask, are you a morning or an evening person?
That's a good question. It depends on what you're talking about.
I'll ask the question and you can.
All right.
So I do this pre-question now because for my first question, I always ask we know that the most successful and happy people have a morning routine. And then I found out my first 3 or 4 guests all had evening routines and were night people and just not morning people at all. So I thought, well, if I get smarter, right? And ask, so this is my attempt at machine learning, I guess. If I ask in advance, are you a morning or an evening person, then maybe I could tailor this question specifically for my guests. So what do you do each morning or evening that sets your day up for success?
So I've listened to a few episodes and I knew you were going to ask me this question, and it was scaring me to death because while I do believe I've had some success in my career, I don't believe it was because of my morning or evening routine, but I do have a morning routine.
Oh, great.
So I will share, but it's different if it's a weekday versus a weekend.
Fair. This
was inspired by my daughter because she had a project at school where she was to describe, actually, it was an improv sort of training exercise where she was to describe her morning routine. I wanted to bring it in and read it, but she couldn't find it. So I'll reproduce it as best I can because my morning routine is tied closely to my kids. Because I get to take them to school every morning.
How many kids do you have?
2 kids.
2 kids?
2 daughters.
Okay.
And it's absolutely my life. I mean, changed my life and gave, if anybody asked me what the most important thing is, it's getting them raised and just being their dad.
Oh, that's
great. It's just the most amazing thing. If anybody needs to know anything about me, that's probably the biggest thing. That's the most important thing in my life. So I'm not a morning person, but I have to have a morning routine because I have to be to work early enough and I have to get these girls to school. So here's what it's like on a typical weekday. Usually the dogs wake me up because they're barking. We have a Shepherd Collie mix who's about 60 pounds, and we have a Min Pin who's about 10, 12 pounds. And before we got him, my morning routine was a lot different. We got him because my wife ran across him. She was driving the kids to school one of the days she took him to school, and found him in the inner city limping around. Aww. He had been abandoned and was in pretty bad shape. And he was about 12 years old at the time. So she picked him up, brought him home. Suddenly our lives changed because he has a morning routine and he's very demanding about it. So normally I wake up to the barking dogs because the little one's like, I'm not going to wait till you guys wake up. I want to eat now. So she, of course, follows his lead and she starts barking. So I jump up, get out there, throw some food in their bowls, try to get, and the little one, the Min Pin, he's got some hip problems, so he's always falling over. So he starts running and then he falls, and then he gets up and he runs, and he kind of has a cute little, he doesn't really bark, he sort of huts. So he's like, kind of like that, running, falling down. So then the other dog, of course, is trying to eat his food, so I got to shove her off. Her name's Poppy. I have to shove her off into another room with her food, put the gate up, go down. The girls are still not awake because their alarms are going off, but then the
dogs are barking, the alarms are going off, and
their alarms are going off.
Sound asleep.
So I wake them up. I stand there and watch them because sometimes I'll wake them up. I'll go upstairs to get the dogs back under control, and they're still not up, and so we're late. So I got to make sure they get up. So then once I get them up, I stumble into the shower, take my shower, brush my teeth, do all my stuff, usually come out about almost exactly 3 minutes later than I meant to, and the girls still aren't ready. I always have this fantasy that I'm going to rush out. They're going to be ready to jump in the car, right? All we got to do is run and jump in the car. But no, there's still more wrangling to do. Maybe one of the dogs is outside still pooping or whatever. So we got to get the dog back in, rush out the door, jump in the car, and listen to music with my girls on the way to school. Usually it's either Cardi B or 21 Pilots, depending on whose turn it was to pick the music. But that's weekdays. And then actually, once I get them dropped off, now I can listen to my podcast and kind of relax and make my way to work.
Oh, nice.
So If it's a weekend, however,
Okay.
I try to sleep in. Usually that doesn't work because the dogs don't know it's a weekend and the girls still don't wake up. So somebody's got to get the dogs to stop barking. It's usually me. But then I probably try to go back to bed. Unless we have a horse show that day. My oldest daughter, rides saddlebred horses in what's called saddle seat competitions, which is a
great.
showmanship sort of thing. And she gets to learn all sorts of great stuff. This is still my morning routine, isn't it? She gets to learn all sorts of great stuff about, horses and being with responsibility, and there are lots of great quotes about how important horses are to people. And so, but there's still a lot of rushing around to make the coffee and the eggs and the bacon and the getting everybody ready. Where's your horse stuff?
And there's a lot of horse stuff, right?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there's the stuff you have to wear and the hair stuff and the makeup and and it's never in the same place, even though we have all these different methodologies of, well, if you put it all here when you get home, then it'll be there when it's time to go. So that's our weekend morning routine.
Well, that sounds like so much fun. And as a fellow equine enthusiast, I absolutely can understand and love that story. I actually event my off-the-track thoroughbred.
Oh, cool.
His name is Tommy. So we have great fun, too. And then for my next two questions, I think so often we conflate the definition of success and happiness. Mm-hmm. So I like to separate them out and just ask, what's your definition of success?
So I have a micro definition and a macro definition. My micro is very nerdy and very engineering-like, but also pharmaceutical industry and project manager-like. You are successful if you achieve the predetermined result, right? So if you have a project, it's sort of similar to the definition of quality. In project management pharmaceuticals, you predefine a result you're trying to achieve. Okay. If you achieve that result, you have success. But that's very engineering-like and very,
spoken like a true
nerdy,
scientist, right?
On a macro level, though, just on a life level, which I think is probably more helpful for people, I think for me, it's living my values. And especially my values include helping other people. So I look at what impact I'm having for others. And if I'm having an impact for others, lately it's been, am I having an impact on my daughter's lives? And I measure that by what are their values and are they living their values? And do they value impacting others' lives like I do? So if I'm going through life, I'm on my deathbed, however many years from now, and I'm looking back, I think I'll be looking at, did I lead a good life? It'll be, have I had impact for other people?
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. That's very wonderful. And then secondly, what's your definition of happiness?
I struggled with this one, coming up with what? I don't know. It's similar to my definition of success, I guess. I think if I'm experiencing others as suffering less, if I'm around other people achieving what they want to achieve or they're getting to do what they want to do, it makes me happy. Now, I don't know if it's hard to, it's almost like defining love. I know if I'm loving something, I know if I'm happy, but defining what that happiness means. And one of the things that I've noticed about myself too, is I don't need to be happy all the time, and in fact, what I try to teach my kids is to experience happiness, you will experience sadness. And I think I was telling you about Basil the Wonder Dog, who's the min pin, who's almost died several times. And we think the military is going to want to study him because he may be immortal. But we experience intense sadness, but we never would have experienced that sadness if we hadn't found him and if he hadn't brought so much joy to our family just by being his little personality, right?
Oh, that's great. No, I really appreciate that. And the reason I like to ask these questions are because so many busy professionals, we're rushing through life and we'll be happy when we hit this measure of success. Yeah. And then we hit that measure of success and we're still not magically happy. And so I think it's just really interesting to have that conversation and kind of tease that out when we can.
I completely agree. And what I've discovered, it's taken me a while, and some people get it quicker than me, but I did discover at some point, what is that saying? Life is the thing that happens while you're making other plans.
Yep, exactly.
So yeah, I'm all about setting goals and achieving your goals and all that stuff, but you you absolutely have to realize you don't wait for the achievement of those goals to live your life and
Right.
to look for fulfillment and joy in your life. So, well, I mean, the goal for me, for the kids, is to get them raised, right?
Right.
But am I looking forward to that day? Not necessarily, I'll be happy if I can watch them have their fulfilled lives, but I'm going to be sad because they're going to leave the house. And I mean, that's the goal, right?
Right. Always.
But I better enjoy what's going on right now because this is life. This is the part that's fun.
Yeah, no, that's such a great way to put it for sure, Steve. I appreciate that a lot. Question number 4. This is probably my single-handedly favorite question. What do you know now that you wish you would have known 10 years ago?
Buy Apple stock.
Spoken like a true investor for sure, right?
When I think about this question, like I wish I knew now what I wish I had known then what I know now. I think about a couple of things. One is I've struggled with that question in my life because I always think, well, would I have done anything different if I'd known that? I would have bought Apple stock probably,
Okay.
but who didn't know Apple was going to do well, especially when they came out with the iPhone, right? So we kind of did know that, but we still didn't do anything. Well, maybe some people did, right?
Right, right.
Fabulous. So one way I try to think about that question is, what am I going to know in 10 years that I wish I knew now?
Oh, that's a great way to put it, yeah.
And it tricks my brain into starting to go, I could probably come up with a few things. I think maybe knowing that, I think what I'm going to know in 10 years is that discipline and time with family and time with friends pay off. So the discipline piece is, if I'd started a podcast 10 years ago, it would be 10 years down the line, right? If I stick with, if I'm enjoying my podcast and I want to, I'm enjoying consulting and I want to keep doing those things, then having the discipline to continue to improve is going to pay off. And I think if 10 years from now me came back in a time machine, then probably go, yeah, that's about right.
Yeah.
Also buy cryptocurrency. Would
Okay.
probably be the other thing I would tell myself, isn't it? I think that's the next big thing. So, but I'm not going to do anything with that one.
Well, we'll put a pin in that, and 10 years from now, we'll listen to this podcast.
I think the
see.
bottom line there is, that, and if I were telling myself 10 years ago, I would say, everything works out okay. Works out okay. There'll be tragedies. There'll be awful things that happen, and there'll be suffering. You know what? Everything turns out okay.
Yeah, and to your question about, if I would have known anything different, would I have done anything different? And for me, I knew the answer is probably no. I'm still going to be, hard-headed and have to live my life on my own for sure. So
I'd make new mistakes. I wouldn't make the same. I've made plenty of mistakes, but I probably would have made different mistakes.
that's fair. Yeah.
Maybe
for
not
sure.
'cause there are some things going on in our life right now that I can point to specific decisions we made that had we made a different decision, there wouldn't be as much suffering in our life right now. Yeah, I probably would change those things.
Sure.
But I don't know what other things I would have done that would have caused other types of mistakes to happen, right?
Anytime you shift one decision, another one shifts too, probably.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's right.
Who knows? And for the 5th and final question, what do you think is the biggest challenge that busy professionals face in their daily lives?
I think it's attention. I think the biggest scarcity right now that a lot of companies are getting fabulously wealthy on by taking advantage of the scarcity is attention. So there are so many things competing for our attention. I've heard this more than once. There are highly talented, the best engineers in the world are sitting at Facebook, spending their days trying to figure out how to keep us on Facebook for 15 more seconds so that we could see one more ad, So my recommendation is that we have to guard our attention, knowing that it is this precious resource and super limited, So we need to figure out what are those things that are important to us that we need to give our attention to. And I love Facebook. It's been, so I'm not speaking poorly about social media, but I've had to be really intentional about guarding my attention and not letting the things that it wants me to do,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
and to use it for good as much as possible. Now, there are times where I want my attention to be just on something banal and I just want to veg out, right? So I'll let my attention drift off there, but I have to remember I'm still spending my attention on something. right? So I think that's probably, so I would say listen to more podcasts like Beyond the Stethoscope. I think that's where your attention should go.
Oh, thank you, Steve. That was very kind. And where can our listeners find you one more time if they'd like to connect with you or learn more?
I'm on LinkedIn, Steve_Vinson, Vinson, Twitter with the same handle. And I don't know if that's my LinkedIn handle. That is definitely my Twitter handle. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. I'm the host of The Life Science Effect, which is thelifescienceeffect.com. If you want to shoot me an email, that's great too. Steven with a V. .Vinson, Vinson at bpm-associates.com. I think we need a new URL for our company, don't you? Like to make it easier to petsgetit.com or something.
Yes, yes. A shameless plug for our business, the business I'm working in at Pinpoint Pharma. We're a 21st century compounding pharmacy and about to launch our and it will be launched when this podcast goes live for sure with petsgetit.com. And for just all of those reasons, want to make sure that people can find us and that their pets actually get their medicine, right?
Absolutely. So. Basil, I tell you, man, I told you that whole story about Basil, the little min pin, just had an awful time for a few days. We were a wreck. We thought we were going to have to put him down, and then we finally got him to start taking his medicine, and he started getting better. And I'm just thinking I'm going to be one of your first customers when it comes out to help little Basil make sure he gets his medicine and doesn't have any other episodes, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. We're so excited to have the opportunity for sure to serve the public, to leverage and use innovation and technology to improve the lives of people and their pets. And I really appreciate your podcast, The Life Science Effect, and all that you're doing for this space as well here in Indiana. So thank you again, Steve, for joining us today, and you have a wonderful day.
Oh, you're so welcome. It was fun. Thank you. Thanks for listening to this week's special episode. What you just heard was me being interviewed by Angela Demaree. Go over to your favorite podcast listening app and look up Beyond the Stethoscope to listen to more great interviews of even more important people in the world of business and entrepreneurship and veterinary science, etc. Again, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week. You have just experienced the Life Science Effect. If you liked it, be sure and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And more importantly, tell your colleagues, tell your boss, tell your friends. It'll make you look smart, and maybe it'll even get you a raise. Thanks again to our presenting sponsor, BPM Associates. Set your medical innovations in motion. BPM helps life science companies design, manage, and execute their most complex projects. What effect will you cause? Thanks to today's guest and to all of our guests. Who else should I be talking to? Send me an email at Steven.vinson at bpm-associates.com. That's all for now. Thanks for listening, and go make something amazing happen.